We are living in an era of peril. We have so many fires burning. Syria, the South Sudan, Central African Republic, Libya. There is nothing we cannot overcome. It's not a crisis of political issues. It's a crisis of global solidarity.
The United Nations, or UN, was created to, quote, save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, protect human rights, maintain international peace and security, and uphold international law, end quote. The United Nations was founded on October 24, 1945, after its predecessor, the League of Nations, was disbanded. The League of Nations had been created through the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, but ended up being disbanded in 1946 due to its ineffectiveness in maintaining the peace. The United Nations Charter was first formulated at the San Francisco Conference on April 25, 1945. It was presided over by President Franklin Roosevelt, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, and attended by representatives of over 50 nations. The name United Nations was coined by President Roosevelt. At the time, the main goals of the UN were negotiating and maintaining the peace immediately after the wartime. The United Nations has 6 principal governing bodies: the General Assembly, the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council, the Trusteeship Council, the International Court of Justice, and the Secretariat. The UN General Assembly's role is to discuss issues and make recommendations. The General Assembly supervises the activities of the other UN governing bodies, from which the Assembly receives reports. The UN Security Council is responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. The UN Economic and Social Council is in charge of coordinating the economic, social, humanitarian, and cultural activities of the UN and its specialized agencies. The UN Trusteeship Council is in charge of colonial territories. The UN International Court of Justice is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. The UN Secretariat, or Secretary General, is the principal administrative officer of the United Nations. The Secretary General oversees the preparation of the United Nations budget and is the chief spokesperson for the United Nations. The United Nations also holds global conferences, which include debates about the proliferation of nuclear weapons, small arms trafficking, overpopulation, hunger, crime, access to safe drinking water, the environment, the role of women, and human rights. Although effective, the UN global conferences have faced large amounts of criticism, as some observers claim that the conferences are too large and unwieldy to be considered efficient. Criticism has often addressed the fact that the UN is trying to solve a great number of global issues and enough action is not being taken. However, considering the scale of the global crises, it is unwise to think that the United Nations has not been doing anything. After World War II, a committee headed by Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt and chair of the United Nations Commission, published the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document which, quote, declares the rights that every single person in the world should have, end quote. This document was finalized and proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on December 10, 1948. Today, all member states of the United Nations have signed on the UN Charter in agreement with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. According to Eleanor Roosevelt, human rights are, quote, in small places, close to home, and ensure that every man, woman, and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, and equal dignity without discrimination. Her ideas are prevalent in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Declaration set out, for the first time, fundamental human rights to be universally protected. The Declaration includes 30 articles that set out exactly what the human rights are. Later, with Eleanor Roosevelt's guidance and the foundation set by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, known as OHCHR, was developed. It has, quote, led responsibility in the UN system for the promotion and protection of human rights, end quote. The OHCHR plays a key role in taking steps towards resolving human rights situations in the world. Recently, the United Nations peacekeeping forces, along with other branches led by the OHCHR, have been taking action against the following issues: detention camps for refugees, child workers, adolescents not being able to attend school, armed groups taking over schools in countries in the Middle East, harmful conditions for the disabled and imprisoned, water crises, violence against the LGBT community, terrorism, and child marriage in many countries in Africa and Southeast Asia. The United Nations is trying its best to provide safe and healthy living conditions for all humans, as written in the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Thanks to UN conflict resolution, the number of people dying in conflicts has declined rapidly. UN peacekeepers, since 1945, have undertaken over 60 field missions and negotiated 172 peaceful settlements. The peacekeepers are currently involved in 17 operations around the world. Additionally, the United Nations specialized agencies have been working to restore the deserved human rights of women and children, along with improving education and health. Because of its work in maintaining the peace and bettering the lives of people everywhere, the UN has received the Nobel Peace Prize 12 times.
Peace must be sought above all because it is the condition for every member of the human family to live a life of dignity and security.
The United Nations has had many successes in ending various conflicts and wars, but it has also faced several failures. First, nuclear proliferation. In 1970, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed by 190 nations, meaning that no country could develop nuclear weapons. But many nations are continuing to develop nuclear weapons, and the UN has faced criticism for its inability to enforce its treaties. Second, the veto power of the UN Security Council's permanent members. The Security Council's 5 permanent members have the power to veto a vote. If there is a veto, a resolution cannot be adopted. The most recent use of the veto was in 2012 when the Security Council attempted to approve sanctions to intervene and prevent genocide in Syria, but the sanction was vetoed and action was prevented. While many people have greatly criticized the failures of the United Nations as oversight, the size of the UN's impact should be taken into consideration. The UN has affected the life of every single human as it has maintained the peace and created better living conditions for us all. Going forward, the UN's newly developed 17 Sustainable Development Goals will greatly aid in restoring human rights to the people.
The 70th session of the General Assembly has opened with a towering achievement. The adoption of the 2030 Agenda, including 17 inspiring Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Our aim is clear, our mission is possible, and our destination is in our sight. When we stand together, there is no limit to what we can achieve.
In areas of the world that are undergoing crises, the UN has played and continues to play a positive role by taking a stand for the individuals who have not been able to exercise the human rights that they were born with. As the Declaration of Human Rights states, quote, "Recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world."